This is Morgan Freeman. If you enjoy listening to The Edge, support them by subscribing to The Edge on iTunes, Stitcher, and you can listen through the iHeartRadio app. Get busy listening.
This is The Edge.
The advantage it means.
They let guy just spit on me for no reason.
That's horrible.
Is there some comfort in uncertainty, do you think?
You're a degenerate.
Because Australian Shepherds need action.
Wow. Yeah.
This is The Edge.
That's a self-loathing term that I use.
Oh, got it.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm Mark Thompson. West Coast listeners are going to know the dominance of the John and Ken show, very likely. The show's on talk radio. KFI Radio is the most listened to talk radio station in America. And the top-rated afternoon drive show is the John and Ken show. It's known for being this blowtorch on politicians and newsmakers. And the hottest part of that blowtorch is John Kobylt, our guest today. Now, John will talk about his background. He started as a sports journalist, and then he moved into this world of radio, and opinion radio has carried this man who is comfortable with his opinion and doesn't apologize for his opinion, has carried him to the top. Political analyst, reporter, and regular contributor Michael Shure will join me for the conversation with John. If you haven't yet, please check out past conversations on our website, edge-show.com, or you can go to iTunes, and they're all archived there. Some great conversations that really stand the test of time. I want to thank all of you who've made financial contributions. Wow, thank you. You throw us $20, it goes a long way. It helps cover the cost of the show. No one makes any money on this show, but we appreciate all the ways you help us keep the lights on. On with the show.
You're listening to The Edge. Join us on the web at edge-show.com.
Please welcome John Kobylt, everybody. Come on, John Kobylt. It's exciting. Wow.
It's a heck of a crowd you draw.
Everybody's jacked up to have you here, John.
Thank you.
This is very cool. You are a, would you call yourself a provocateur?
Oh.
You are. Like
that sounds a little dirty. Yeah, I guess that's what we do. Yeah, we provoke people. That's the whole purpose.
I should also mention Michael Shure is here. You're not so much a provocateur.
Well, I'm not, nor am I appreciated by the studio audience that each week loves me, but they give it all for John.
Well, I think today they're all about. But John, you really have lit a fire under L.A. talk radio, and what I mean by that is, of all the voices in that format, you're the guy who just comes out swinging. You seem to say what you legitimately feel. It is all sincere what you say, meaning you don't jack it up for the air.
No, not the opinions.
Just the style, maybe.
There's more energy if you're on the radio. If I did that in people's living rooms, nobody would invite me over. If I was shouting and waving my arms, during dinner. So yeah, it's obviously partly a performance, but the opinions and whatever facts we make up, that's all coming. That's all real.
It seems like a lot of your opinions are informed by some working class background, like, how come these people can't go out and get a better job or make better choices and that kind of thing. Is that the case? Do you come from that?
Very blue collar, lower middle class, immigrant background. My dad came from Poland after he was captured by the Nazis when he was 14 years old. So he spent 5 years in a Nazi work camp and then went to England and drove trucks for the English army, then came to America, to New Jersey, and met my mother. So that's the base. Wow. They bought a house for $19,000 4 months after I was born. And everybody on the block was blue-collar people. Like my dad was a factory worker who made tablecloths and boxes and plastic products, different factories. The guy next door was an electrician. The guy on the other side was a construction worker. My best friend down the street, another electrician. There was one guy who wore a jacket and tie that everybody was suspicious of. And all he was a circulation manager for a newspaper. But he was the only guy who wore a jacket in the morning. He had a company car. And so people looked at him.
Did your dad ever talk about that time that he was in a Nazi work camp?
It was hard to get him to talk. Like it seems, it's a cliche, everybody in the generation. They saw such horrible stuff, but in later years, I would liquor him up and set up a camera and record it. So because the stories were incredible, and he didn't speak English real well. He had a thick Polish accent, but if I got a couple of whiskeys in him, then he would start talking, and yeah, it was. I mean, to be captured by Nazi soldiers when you're 14, taken from his home, and he never saw his family again for the next 40 years. Never saw his mom again at all. And went back 40 years later, saw his dad and sister and other people. And
Did you go back with him for that?
No. He went with my mom, although I went back.
Recently, in the last few years.
About 2.5 years ago. I met his sister, who was 85. She's since passed away. But the story is very dramatic. The thing is, he never talked about it, never complained. If anybody could, wave the victimhood flag, the oppression flag, the, oh, my God, did I get screwed flag, not a word ever. And he just worked 12 hours a day for a number of the years when I was a kid, overnights in the factory, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., often Saturdays, come back soaked with sweat. You could see the salt on his blue collar. My mom worked part-time. She had to go and work just so we could afford a second car because she needed to drive us around to take us to school. And again, there were no complaints. She had a history as a child. Her parents were alcoholics, and they were sick, and they were face down on the floor most of the time, and she had to raise herself and her sister. So, but again, there weren't complaints about it. If it was ever discussed, it was just matter of fact. That's the way life was, and I obviously absorbed that. Plus, I just don't have a great tolerance for everybody whining and complaining and having a bunch of excuses.
Right. It seems that when it comes to things like entitlement and programs that might involve what some would consider being on the dole, you have a very short patience for that.
I understand your bad luck and certain circumstances, but there's a lot of childish complaining to me that goes on in our society. You can really get up every day and do work. You really can. Everybody can. And all your grievances may be absolutely legitimate, but you can actually get up and change your personal status in life, little by little, day by day, just by getting up and showing up somewhere and doing something half competently. So,
my mom was always referencing her childhood and how tough it was. I can't imagine being in a house where Dad was in a Nazi work camp and never said, yeah, really, you can't get out of bed for school? Dad was in a Nazi work camp for 5 years.
It's funny, they didn't pull that on us, though, It just came through osmosis.
But it's funny because parents and families where you didn't grow up that way always reference the ones who did. You can't get your ass out of bed. There are people who went to Nazi war camps who are getting their ass out.
The Kobylt.
The Kobylt, but they're not talking about it. It's the other parents that are talking about with the Kobylt.
That's absolutely true. So with that working class background, your kid involved in newspapers, I think, sports reporting.
When I was 14, one thing led to another. They had a morning news broadcast on the intercom system. I had taken a class called Newspaper in the Classroom freshman year. I was 13 years old. And within a few weeks, they said, well, why don't we do a newscast every morning? And read the news out of the New York Times. I went to the sports office, got the coaches to give me all the scores. And me and a few other people, we put on this production every morning.
And what town are you in, John?
Saddlebrook, New Jersey, which is about 10 miles from the George Washington Bridge.
Which has a note from this Yankee fan. That's where Chris Chambliss lived when he played for the Yankees. Saddle River, New Jersey.
Upper Saddle River, that was the rich town.
Right,
Richard Nixon lived there. We lived in Saddlebrook.
Oh, okay.
That was
Saddlebrook was not Saddle River.
No, that was way down the river in a lot of ways, economically, socially.
He doesn't live there anymore.
No, I remember that. So that led to all the coaches saw me every day, and I started writing for the local paper. I started acting as the statistician, manager, all-around handyman for all the teams, which meant I could keep track of the statistics, and I'd call them in to the newspapers. And there were lots of thriving local newspapers, kind of like the Orange County Register, all over New Jersey. So I had 6 of them, and I'd call the results in. And sometimes other newspapers would call me because they needed the information. It was $4 a call, about $25 a game.
Meaning you got $4
I got $4 from every newspaper, and 3 times a week in the winter because it was 2 basketball games, and it was a wrestling match, and football games, anything. I'd go to track meets, whatever they wanted.
The original stringer.
Yeah, I was a stringer. But, when you're 14, in the 1970s, $75 a week with no rent to pay to my parents, That was a lot of money. And I wrote stories for the local paper. By the time I was 16, I got hired on the inside at one of the papers, and they had me answer the phones and take down the scores from all the other stringers. So now I was getting a real minimum wage, probably about $2.50 an hour. And by the following year, they gave me full-time work, like all summer. Sent me out to cover American Legion baseball games and local golf tournaments. Eventually, I covered the U.S. Open tennis tournament.
Geez, so you were getting credentialed as a teenager.
Yeah. I covered
events.
I covered the tennis tournament. John McEnroe yelled at me for a question once. That's when I knew I'd made it. I covered Jack Nicklaus winning, I think, U.S. Open in Jersey. They covered all the professional sports teams in New York City. We had a big staff. We had 16 people in the sports department.
And how old are you at this point?
I started at 16 till I was 21.
God, that's awesome.
I was the overnight editor there. By the time I was 19, I was laying out the national pages, working 11 to 7, just like my dad was, and editing everybody's copy and laying out the pages, writing the headlines, cropping the pictures and the captions, the whole business.
And what do you know of where those papers are today and what's left?
It used to be really thriving competition. Everybody had separate staffs. Now it's owned, I think, by one company that basically has turned them all into a wire service. And all the papers run the same news from the same writers of the same wire copy.
Right. It's like a dressed-up penny saver type thing.
Yeah. It doesn't have the influence it used to. Because they're really, really hyper-local. You'd get 60 high schools that we covered, and then there'd be big local sections with all the news of each town, all the city council meetings and what was going on. So it's something that doesn't exist anymore.
No, it's certainly not as a newspaper. I guess they're trying to do that with patch news, right?
Yeah, they are. But that's a long experiment at this point, too, right?
Yeah.
It's still going. Though, what people are saying is that local news is the only part of news that's sort of thriving in its own way because they figured out how to cut costs and still corral that interest in very, like you said, hyper-local stories.
Yeah, and if you have the money to finance it, could be a very powerful media force because that's what people care about the most.
Sure. It's all politics is local, and I find myself watching the local news more than I'm drawn to network broadcast.
Yeah, it's human nature. You care about your family, your neighborhood, your town, your region, before you start caring what's going on in Washington or London.
And here, you don't care about a car chase in Des Moines, but there's
No,
a car chase
a car
locally.
exactly
You're all
right.
over.
It is weird, though, just as we're talking about local news, that local news is dominated by the adage, if it bleeds, it leads type mentality. There's a sort of a crime blotter aspect to local news. Maybe it's news generally, but really when you watch local news, you get a sense of a much more dangerous place than we really live in, I think.
It's hugely distorting because they're looking to get an in-the-moment visceral reaction. Everything about life now is getting dopamine released in your brain and getting your adrenaline pumped up. And so that's why people are staring at their screens all the time, desperately looking for the latest, little blip from Facebook or Instagram or a text or something because, it's something new. And it's a dopamine release in your brain that everyone's addicted to. And the same thing as watching local news. It's like, oh, wow, there's dangerous things going on. Look at the car chase. Look at the shooting. Look at the blood. Yeah. So, none of that is working the rest of your brain. It's just working the most animalistic part of your brain.
And from a news standpoint, what bothers me is it's not really informing you about your community in any significant way.
No. And they don't intend to. They know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. But it has the same effect nationally because what it does locally is local. But, a shooter goes into Fort Lauderdale Airport, and you can be sure that travelers, whether they were in Lincoln, Nebraska, or Spokane, or wherever they were scared. People talking to each other. Oh, I'm scared to be in baggage claim here today. And, it makes everything seem like an epidemic. It really sort of, like you said, Mark, it just sort of takes what is, a story and makes it seem a lot less safe locally when that's not really what happens every single day.
So you were hip deep in this news world and as a newspaper journalist, and that's back when papers were really doing some real news. Real
all
local.
Sports I was doing.
Yeah, you were doing all sports, but still, even that was there was no internet then.
No, there was nothing.
Yeah, but that's why those calls that you were making to tell people what the score was and to tell the newspaper originally when you were a 14-year-old, 15, 16-year-old kid, that's why those calls were important, just to kind of set the context. There was no other way.
There was no other way the town was going to know if their football team won or not, unless they opened the paper Sunday morning and saw the little summary.
And you needed a roll of dimes for those calls. It wasn't like you could just go into your pocket and pull the cell phone out and make those calls.
I remember they assigned me to a game my senior year. The real newspaper assigned me to a game, and I had to I didn't have a driver's license, but I got a friend of mine to drive me about 20 miles, and I covered a wrestling match, I think it was. And then after the wrestling match, I had to go and dictate a story. This was going to be my first byline, right? So I scribbled it out on a yellow paper. I found a payphone, and I'm throwing coins in the payphone, although they might have let me call collect, and dictated the story. And after I did all this, the whole place had cleared out. There was only a janitor left, and I suddenly realized I have no ride home. It had never occurred to me because I was so excited to go and cover something and to get a byline that when it was done, it was close to midnight. I'm 20 miles from home. It's like, there's nothing.
How did you get home that night?
Well, my mom wouldn't drive on highways. She was terrified. I called a friend of mine, and he got lost and got into trouble with his mom. So at 2 a.m, my dad left his job at the factory. It was the only time he did it because he was doing the overnights. And he came and he got me and drove me back, and I slept on the couch in his factory. I remember it was a sofa that had holes in it from rats that lived inside the foam. Yeah. But it was, that's how focused and crazy I was. I didn't think of it. I didn't care. They asked me to do it, and I said yes.
Sure, you need that. You need that to really excel, obviously.
Yeah.
That same kind of thing you can see being played out in startup world now. Where you hear about these guys, they're working straight through, and they're driven by an idea, by an excitement and enthusiasm, and you had that same thing.
Yeah, people are born that way, I think. That's tough to teach people.
It is, but I think there's an element of finding what you like, too. And I think that when people are able to do what they like and are good at it, so, the old adage of luck is when opportunity meets preparation, that when you find something you like, then it's a pleasure, too, to be driving 20 miles to a wrestling match. You can complain.
Yes.
Well, you couldn't complain about it. You weren't allowed to complain about anything. But most people could complain about a 20-mile ride and to go to a wrestling match, but they wouldn't want to do any other thing in the world.
I know. See, there's certain moments where you get an opportunity, and you have every reason in the world to say, well, no, I can't do it because, I don't have a ride, and my mom, and it's raining out. And everybody, a lot of people do that. And it's just like you say yes. I tell my kids this. Just say yes. There's always reasons to say no. Say yes. Because yeses lead to more opportunities. People say, wow, look at that. He did that, and he didn't even have a ride home. And, it makes an impression. It's like, I know I'll send this guy out, and he'll show up no matter what. He's not going to tell me that his car is stuck in the snow or, he's got a rash. He's going to go there.
There's your quote right there. I'm going back to always say yes rather than the rash, but go ahead.
There's a quote with the rash also.
Yeah.
Just because you mentioned your kids, since you didn't have those moments where your dad was sort of sitting you down and giving you he led by example, it sounds like your dad did.
Yeah.
But with your kids, do you guys have have you had a lot of conversations as they've grown up with sort of this is the state of things?
Well, that's what you just said. I said, do what you love. Do what you love, and the money will follow. You need 3 things to have like a perfect kind of job or career. Is that you really love it, you're at least competent at it, and then the money comes. And then if you get the money, that you're set, right? You're doing something that not only you love but you're good at. And now you make some money so you could have whatever life you want to have. But the first component is that you love it. It is hard to be good at something if you hate it. It really is.
Right.
And so then you don't get the money because you're not good because you hate it. So you start out with your passion.
Yeah, try to find something you like anyway. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's degrees of passion. Some people just don't have one, but get something you can maybe tolerate.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a job that you hated? Not the actual job, but the profession, I guess is a better way of saying. Were you ever forced into, whatever, being a bar back for a summer and it was just the worst thing ever, or working in a bank or anything like that?
Yeah, I did. I had one lost year where I went to Chicago and I worked at a hotel as a cashier at a gift shop. But I was kind of doing a show. I was on a raised platform with the register and a table in front of me, and people would come and they would buy cigarettes and newspapers and gifts. But I was always joking around with them and always teasing them and carrying on. And so I felt like I was doing a performance, and that's what kept me going because I don't normally like to talk to people. But this was the one strange exception where I just felt a performing instinct coming out.
You really are this weird cross current of a guy who doesn't want to interact with anybody, and then obviously a showman.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't
it's
even
a mental illness.
No, it's not something you find a lot.
Yeah, it's probably a psychosis.
But I mean, like, you do see it, though. I mean, you see people who are comfortable talking to people they don't know but don't want to interact with people they don't know. And Johnny Carson was a classic example of that, who just had this great comfort coming out, doing a monologue, doing the show, and then became a recluse.
He was my idol growing up. I started watching him when I was 11. Obsessed with the show. I watched it every night, followed by Tom Snyder. I would sleep through classes, and then that was my schooling, just to watch performance, to watch comic rhythm and comic timing, how to carry on a conversation, the rituals and repetitions within the show that you looked forward to, and so that was my master's course in broadcasting.
And then Tom Snyder, and that threw
Snyder.
it all out the window.
Well, you're right. Yeah.
So what to do, what not to do.
Well, a lot of us grew up with Johnny Carson as the role model, even as we wanted to be Johnny Carson. All my friends were comics.
Yeah.
I wanted to have a talk show, and so we all did kind of what you did. I mean, in terms of watching, and then we watched Tom Snyder. And as I got to college, I remember when I was really high, because in college I was the first time I smoked pot. I don't smoke pot anymore. In fact, after college I didn't really smoke it. And pot, you didn't know how high pot would get you at that time. They had now you know exactly. You can dial it in by degree. Anyway, when you watch Tom Snyder high, it is a remarkable experience, because you're thinking, I can't believe somebody can be so self-absorbed. I remember thinking, this is unreal. I mean, does anybody else see this? This is...
Well, that was the fascination. I mean, he looked like he was insane.
Yeah.
And at 1 o'clock in the morning, with a dark background and the smoke swirling in the air.
Yeah, he used to smoke a cigarette.
Yeah, it was there was like a surrealistic quality to it, that you were looking at this guy in a mental institution talking to himself.
But it was hard to watch him if you weren't altered. I mean, I found him.
Well, he also. I grew up in New York in the same media market as you did, John. So, and he did local news in New York.
He did. Yeah,
so he was like the Channel 2 news anchor. So those newscasts were unbelievable, because he didn't really button it down much.
No.
He used to do the news sort of in the same way, in that kind of
Yeah, I
conversational.
mean, he couldn't. He was reading off a prompter, so it was a little different. But he would go off script all the time. Say, "Geez, I can't believe they. Why are we doing this story? That kind of thing."
People I know who worked in that newsroom say that he used to have a collection of people around his desk, because he'd just be telling stories all day, or during his work day. He obviously was captivating. I mean, we all felt that way, but well, he was definitely off the rails when it came to sort of megalomania.
But captivating.
Captivating.
And they all seem to, I mean, we're getting off a little bit, but they all seem to capture a little bit of that personality thing, this comfort. You talked about it at being at the newsstand in Chicago, or the gift shop in the hotel, selling and talking to people. And that's sort of what brings all these people out. Letterman's no different. Even Charlie Rose, who has turned himself into the story now after all these years, but did it in the same way. Here, I can talk to you one-on-one, get your story, but show you how much I know about your story. So he's a little Tom Snyder-esque in a totally different way.
That's true. I never thought of that, but he's kind of like an uptown Tom Snyder.
Right,
He is, yeah. Completely.
Yeah. Well, when did you get into radio then, John?
Well, I wanted to since I was 7 years old. And I was afraid I wouldn't be any good. And having the newspaper career kept me from confronting the fear and dealing with it. But I did go to college for a year and a half at Seton Hall, and I was a newscaster. And I was afraid to be a disc jockey. I heard all these guys in New York. And I thought
they're all the best.
Yeah,
right?
I was like, listen to Dan Ingram. Dan Ingram was
brilliant.
Was Johnny Carson for me on the radio. So, and all I wanted to be as good as these guys. Then when I went to Chicago for my last year, I actually worked at the University of Chicago radio station. I didn't attend, but they needed people to fill out the time slots. And I started being a disc jockey at 3 in the morning on Sunday nights into Monday mornings, which was the absolute deadest zone. And
Your family loved those overnights and no sleep.
Yeah, I don't know. We were vampires.
Dad, guess what? I got overnight shift.
I got a 3.
Nobody wanted to be out in the daylight. And that's I started doing the disc jockey work. And I one night, I think it was a Christmas night, because I'd work all the holidays. And I was playing disc jockey, just, I don't know, whatever, I guess it was top 40 records. And a guy called in because the transmitter, the tower for the University of Chicago was on a tower, stuck high up in the air, so they could get the station in the suburbs, even though it was only 10 watts. There's some fluky thing. And a guy called me from the suburbs, like 20 miles away, and he said, "You're the best disc jockey I've ever heard on college radio." And I'd only been doing it 2 months. And I thought, well, maybe I can do this. You know, it was like that one phone call that made me so happy. And eventually went back home, went to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. And they had a job service. Because I already knew enough to be on the air because I'd been at 2 colleges. And the job service was postcards tacked onto one of those cork bulletin boards. They'd send out the cards to station owners, send it back, check boxes, need disc jockey, newscaster, sportscaster, production guy. So they gave you unlimited time in the studio to prepare your tape. So you'd sit there and you'd play records and practice intros and read commercials. You put together a 5-minute tape and then send it out. And that's how I got hired in Canton, Pennsylvania. That started it.
And that was music radio, though, right?
Music radio. But all the stations I worked at were personality-style stations, which were much more popular then. This was 1983. You know, now they've squeezed out all the humans from radio, except for talk stations. But then you could play a couple records and then talk for a minute or two, or read a news story that you found funny, and then play a couple more records. So all the stations I worked at, especially the one in Elmira, really encouraged personality. I mean, the Elmira was a small market, but it actually was a really good station with a lot of really strong personalities. Most of them went on to bigger things. And Ken worked in Elmira too.
This is Elmira, New York.
Elmira,
upstate.
New York, yeah. And I don't know why. They just had owners that didn't care.
Now,
and
Ken,
so you could develop yourself.
And Ken is your partner here, and you guys have been together now. That show, John and Ken, for how long?
Actually, it's 29 years this week.
Those of you who are not in the L.A. area, I mean, John and Ken, they just crush it in Afternoon Drive. Back to that in a second. But the Elmira stuff.
Well, the Elmira was like the key stop.
Because that's where you met him.
Well, I met Ken actually technically in Canton. Because I worked in Canton, I moved on.
That was Canton, Pennsylvania, not even Canton, Ohio,
Canton,
right?
Pennsylvania.
No Hall of Fame.
Right. So I leave.
Less to do.
It was WKAD-FM.
There's even less to do.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the Hall of Fame. This isn't that Canton.
Right.
Oh.
No, it really was a one-stoplight town.
It's Las Vegas, New
and
Mexico.
Really, there were across the street from the station, because I worked in the afternoons, and I looked across the street, and there were cows. And I watched them graze all afternoon. We were on a dirt road up a hill. It was as remote as you could get.
That's great.
So I left Canton eventually to go to Elmira. Ken came to Canton from his broadcasting school, which had the same system, and he answered the same card. So he replaced me, but I didn't meet him until I decided I'm going to work 2 jobs at once. And I worked mornings in Elmira, and I came back to Canton to work evenings following Ken. He was doing afternoons, I was doing evenings. And for 3 months, I was on the air 9 hours a day, driving 40 miles there, 40 miles back. I had to make no money.
Right.
Not complaining.
Hey, it's not a Nazi work camp. All right.
That's right.
I'm okay.
You know what? That's exactly what I would tell myself. It's not a Nazi work camp, you know?
But
I'm working on the radio.
The rest of America is driving. This is like a Nazi work camp.
That is a rough schedule. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was 3 months, but I saved $1,000 because I always needed $1,000 in case my car blew up. Because I had all these old, beat up, clunkers that I would drive until they died. I never did any maintenance on them. Just would drive until the engine blew up, and then I'd spend $1,000 and buy another car. That was just the easiest, most efficient way to handle it. And but I got to know him at the station. A job opening occurred in Elmira at a competitor, and I told him, I go get that. And I called his program director, and I said, you should hire Ken. And so they hired Ken, and we were on opposite each other. I had a morning show, and he was like a sidekick on another station's morning show.
And would you guys hang out, or you guys?
Yes.
I see.
So
that's how you got to know each other.
Yeah, the two of us were with a whole bunch of disc jockeys passing through. And all we talk about is how do we get out of Elmira.
And that next step was what brought you guys together?
Yeah, it was Atlantic City. The owner of my station in Elmira, his name was Howard Green, W-E-N-Y. He owned a set of stations in Atlantic City. And I'm walking down the hallway, and I heard the general manager of my station talking to the general manager in Atlantic City. And they had a bad ratings book. And I was listening. I was standing outside the door, eavesdropping. And I heard that they had trouble there. Got an idea. And I talked the owner into letting me and Ken move from Elmira to Atlantic City, and we take over that station. It was a 1,000-watt AM oldie station. The signal was so bad, we could not hear it in the studio to tape our own show before the sun rose, because the transmitter was 10 miles away. So we turned on the radio. We had a cassette tape, so we were going to tape our show, and all we got was... And then the sun rose, yeah.
Now, I want to talk about Atlantic City for a second. I'm so glad you worked there. I always felt as though Atlantic City, which is the East Coast's shot at Las Vegas, has the ocean. It could be like a sexier place even than Las Vegas. And yet, it seems for all of my life that it's sort of been a rundown version of Las Vegas. And I want to ask you...
it's a hellhole.
Okay. All right. I guess there was a time that Atlantic City was that sexy place I'm talking about, right?
Yes, but you'd have to go back about to the 70 years. 60, 70, 80 years ago, in that era.
And why did it lose it and never get it back?
It has... terrible, terrible poverty, terrible corruption. While we were there in Atlantic City, we were only there 2.5 years, but the mayor was indicted, and most of the city council was indicted, and they all went to jail. We had these guys as guests. We interviewed them. My wife was working in TV. She interviewed them. They all ended up in jail. It was completely corrupt. There wasn't anyone who cared. And it's a small city. It's one of these oddball places where I think the population is 35,000. But they would get millions and millions of tourists. And they ended up, when the casinos were at their height, you had this narrow strip of casinos on the boardwalk, and you could walk up and down a mile or two, but there was nothing behind the casinos. You couldn't walk 1 block away from the beach. My wife got chased by a pack of wild dogs one day covering a story. Seriously, a pack of wild, crazed, killer dogs chased her. It was just, no one cared. It's been, everybody's been indicted 10 times over. There's constant investigations.
So you
the
think
state takes over.
Fundamentally about corruption?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
No.
It's completely corrupt. They've never had a set of 10 or 20 people who said, it's not that hard. I mean, most cities run semi-competently. This thing was the worst I've ever seen in my life.
I've never understood it. Was Trump's place open then? The Taj, was it Trump Taj?
Oh, that was at the height. Yeah, he was the king of Atlantic City then, because he had opened the Trump Castle, the Trump Plaza. He was holding boxing matches with Mike Tyson. He had the Rolling Stones playing there. The Taj Mahal was open, and it was a monstrosity. I remember the first time I looked at it, because I think I went to the opening, and I was like, the thing was just absurd. It just looked ridiculous. It looked like something from an amusement park. And everybody, of course, was saying, oh, this is wonderful, most beautiful thing I've ever seen. It's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
but
of course, he declared bankruptcy. That was one of the casinos.
Yeah, all the casinos
all of
went
them
bankrupt eventually.
Others got out there. Like Merv Griffin went in there first, thinking that this was going to be fertile ground for his enterprises. He had Resorts International, and then he realized that this was not going to be where things were going to happen.
Yeah, actually, Merv Griffin made some deal. He got out of there whole.
Yeah.
In some weird way.
Yeah.
He ended up.
He was apparently a really good
Shrewd businessman. Yeah, he screwed Trump, I think. I mean, not screwed him, just made a better deal than Trump did.
Yeah, he had Trump had Marla Maples living in one hotel while having Ivana running the other hotel to keep them separately. And it was all over the New York Post and the Daily News every day. So it was actually really entertaining and exciting.
And then you guys left Atlantic City and went where?
To Trenton. And this was a station called New Jersey 101.5. This made our careers. This was the moment. Because it was kind of a run-of-the-mill soft rock station. And a consultant looked at the station's signal, which was huge. Rand, you could hear it from Newark down to Atlantic City.
And signal's a big thing in radio.
Signal
like
is
how many people can really hear it?
How many people? And as I said, Jersey is very densely populated. So we had a market, a potential market that was about the size of Atlanta's metropolitan area. It was huge, but nobody looked at it that way. They saw Philly here. Philly media covered southern New Jersey. New York media covered northern New Jersey. You had a station sitting in the middle, and you could cover a chunk of the New York and Philly markets and everything in between. And he said, let's do New Jersey news, New Jersey talk. We only talked about Jersey topics. You talk about the hyper-local stuff. New Jersey weather, New Jersey traffic every 10 or 15 minutes. So it was Jersey. And as soon as it went on the air, it hit number one. We got there, I think, 2 months after it started. And it just blew up. And we were playing a lot of music, a lot of oldies music. But let me see, it was 6 weeks after we started. And Ken and I were goofing around. We were still transitioning from being morning DJs. We were sort of halfway to being talk hosts. And they had passed a budget in Jersey in the middle of the night with a $1 billion tax increase, which at the time was the largest state tax increase ever.
What year would this be?
This was 1990. Jim Florio was the governor. He had just gotten elected. He had promised no taxes on tape. It was like his George Bush read my lips moment. No new taxes. So they passed $1 billion worth of taxes. And we looked at it humorously. We were going through the budget, and we were finding, the $10,000 that they were spending on the sex lives of salamander stuff, right? Guy named John Budzash was a postal worker. And that's back when postal shootings were big. He called up and he was angry. It's like, ooh, angry postal worker. We got to watch this. And he goes, yeah, you guys are laughing at this, but I'm really angry. He goes, there's something ought to be done about this. And Ken goes, well, why don't you do something about it? He goes, all right, I'll give out my phone number. Anybody angry like me, call me. And that was pre-internet, right? 10 days later, 10,000 people showed up in Trenton, anti-tax rally. I'm standing on the back of a pickup truck with a microphone, shouting and pointing at all the reprehensible bastards in Trenton that just stole your $1 billion worth of tax money. They'd made the mistake of taxing toilet paper, so people were waving rolls of toilet paper on tall sticks. It was right before the July 4th weekend. There was no news. So Channel 4 sent down a crew out of New York and taped the rally. We got home, my wife and I, turned on the news, 6 o'clock, Channel 4. Lead story, first image, me on the back of the truck, shaking my fist at the Trenton government. 10,000 people screaming, waving toilet paper rolls.
And that was the beginning.
That was it.
And
yeah.
you've been waving toilet paper rolls ever since.
Right. Or sending toilet brushes, too.
We lucked into it. We were being goofy disc jockeys. We didn't have an ideology. We didn't have politics. We just lucked into it.
But signal size has always been important to you. From the guy in Illinois who heard you on that little station 20 miles away to the fact that this little station in Trenton then had this reach that they exploited, and that's why 10,000 people showed up in Trenton, right?
And then, you come out to KFI, and it's got the biggest AM signal on the western half of the country. So your signal size really determines your success.
Yeah, and you need to come with the right goods. I mean, you had that same outrage at those guys who were passing that tax bill overnight. You've done that now repeatedly in Southern California. You guys will latch on an issue. You will be dogged about it, and then Ultimately, not fewer than, I don't know, I can think of a dozen times you've done rallies on issues.
What we figured out is that everybody in government expects bad news stories to go away. And they often do. It runs through a news cycle, and then everybody in the news is on to something else. And we found out, which was contrary to, we had radio program directors who would worry that we would harp on things for too many days and too many weeks. But it's no different than if you're a top 40 disc jockey and you're playing the number one song every hour and a half and you're sick of it, but the public isn't. And the thing sits at number one for 10 weeks. And you want to kill yourself if you have to play it one more time. But the public's not sick of it. And the same thing with all the crusades we've gone on and the rallies or covering trials going back to O.J. Simpson. The public's not tired of this. They like to see it build and build. And it's actually like a reality show, like a serial. If you keep adding events and characters and twists and turns, you could take that one issue and you could do it every day for months, maybe years. Because the public gets caught up in the story, and it's not just beating something to death. It's turning something into, a production. And that's what Ken and I were able to do over the years.
And when you look at KFI, and you look at the different things you associate different personalities on KFI with, John and Ken are there rooting out corruption, calling out the politicians. I mean, you may feel as though you're given more credit than you deserve or just the right amount of credit, but the point is your show has clearly established that. And like you don't take any shit from politics or their political mouths. No, you call them
spokesholes.
Spokesholes.
Well, no, if we find a bad guy, and clearly they're wrong, clearly they stole, they deceived, they have a policy that's harming people.
You had Tanaka on?
Yeah.
This
right.
corrupt sheriff?
That's right. And he was, completely evasive, clearly guilty. I mean,
And by the way, he wanted to come on your show, as I recall.
Yes.
That was incredible to me. Michael, this guy was hip deep in corruption.
No, I know Tanaka.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I'm saying that imagine being that guilty and then going to the Lion's Den.
Right.
I mean, asking for a ride to the Lion's Den.
Well, he was running. He was going to run for sheriff.
Right.
And his spokeshole advisor, campaign consultant, thought that, hey, we have a good. He has a good anti-crime stance, and this will play with John and Ken. And that's all they focused on, is that he had a set of issues that they thought were in agreement with our issues. We had an entirely different issue, is that you're up to your neck in corruption, covering up all the police beatings and intimidating the FBI. I don't know why they didn't see that.
Yeah. That was like a gangland slaying. I remember that.
People are pretty myopic when they think something is good that they're doing. They don't think about the rest of what they bring to it.
Did you have Baca on your show? You did, right?
Years ago, we used to have him on quite a bit. And he went crazy on us one day.
Lee Baca is
the sheriff of L.A. County, and he's now under indictment.
Also corrupt.
Also corrupt, yeah. Tanaka was his assistant.
But in the middle of a trial or posturing for a trial right now, isn't that? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So years ago, Baca was promoting some kind of big tax increase that was going to benefit the L.A. County Sheriff's Department. And we got into a debate about it on the air. And I don't know. I said something. He wasn't on the air yet, but I said something about he doesn't have the gonads. And he called up. And he said, live on the air, he goes, "You don't think I have the gonads? I'll come up to your studio right now and show you my gonads." He said this.
Wow.
And I go, "You're going to come up and show me your gonads?" And then I pretended that I was like being sexually harassed and I was highly offended. And it actually made the LA Times that Baca was now going to have to go to a sexual harassment class after threatening to expose himself to Ken and I.
What was as you think about it, 29 years, I know it's an awful long time, but what were the issues and the topics that you felt sort of were burned brightest in your memory of all of that? I mean, you've done all of this stuff where that outrage was well-directed or misdirected.
The O.J. Simpson trial and the verdict was probably the first really big supernova. Because
people needed an outlet for that, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we all needed somebody to be kind of...
This was a funny thing. You know, O.J. had killed Nicole in the summer of '94, and we were covering the run-up to that. And there were a lot of people at the station says, "Oh, God, you're doing this every day. You're doing this every hour." Of course, our ratings were huge, and they weren't looking at that. But they were looking that they were tired of listening to it. Hey, you guys shouldn't do so much. You guys shouldn't do so much.
It's like this year, stop talking about Trump. Stop talking about Trump. Jeff Zucker
exactly.
turns around and says, why would I stop talking about Trump?
No, these things don't come along very often. Yeah. You know, you have to beat things to death when you have the chance. But the public was into it. So I think there was a period we had slackened off our coverage. The trial starts in January of '95. Ken and I actually went to Washington, D.C. in January. We did some shows over some issue. We fly back. The ratings had come out for January of '95, and KNX, the news station, had done gavel-to-gavel coverage of O.J. They shot up for the first time in decades to #1. Beat us. Program director picked us up from the airport. We got in the car. He goes, do O.J. all the time. Do it all 4 hours every day, which we more or less did. And, you know, shot up to #1 ourselves. And that went on. The trial was 9 months. Then there was the aftermath. I think we talked about the O.J. verdict for a solid month, 4 hours a day, October into November of '95. Then the civil trial came later that year. It was you could not exhaust it. The audience was never tired. It was the exact opposite of what everyone was feeling in the station.
Sure.
And it's the same thing with Trump. People were saying this year, some people at the station, it was too much Trump, and it's supporting Trump too much. And I was like, no. You could not exhaust the audience about Trump, whether they loved him or hated him. You couldn't tire anyone out. You still can't. Every time we got a group of people come over the house for anything, for Christmas, for New Year's, to watch a football game, everybody starts talking about Trump.
Oh, yeah.
Half the people love him, half the people hate him, but nobody stops talking about it. So there's no reason why you'd have a talk show not talking about it.
Well, slightly more than half the people hate him. But.
Yeah, well.
And it's funny when I listen, because you're a saber rattler on a lot of different issues. And so sometimes it's hard to figure out like exactly where the policies came down. You're really tough on Hillary Clinton. I thought you were also tough on Trump on some things along the way.
You call what you see.
Right.
You know, he's ridiculous in many ways. We all know her history and baggage. I mean, to me, it's obvious. See, if Ken and I ever joined a political party, we never identified as anything. I didn't grow up that way. I never felt that way.
Sure.
But
don't you rally around certain issues, though? You do.
There's certain issues that I actually, this is my own analysis, and I look at this and it's like, well, this is what I see, this is what I think, and this is what I feel. You know, we went after, the recall. We were a big force recalling Gray Davis.
Sure.
And then Schwarzenegger effed everything up, and we went after him. We went after him worse than we did after Davis. You know, so it's the performance. It's the facts. It's not a preconceived ideology.
The L.A. mayor, Garcetti, you call him?
Yoga pants.
Yoga pants.
Or snowflake.
And thank you for the snowflake, because people on the internet who are hounding me, who feel like I'm too much of a, bleeding heart or whatever, they call me snowflake. But
snowflakes are people who get
out there.
Unnecessarily offended. That's what a snowflake is.
I don't know why I get it, but it's one more thing you can hurl.
Well, I think it's because you don't get unnecessarily offended. You advocate for things that are softer, like with animals.
Right, animals, environment.
No, that's not a snowflake.
Yeah. No, it's not. But
I would tell you if I thought you were a snowflake.
Sure.
That might be a wiener. But
Thank you. By the way, have you seen that documentary, Wiener?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
I want to.
You have to see it, and here's
should.
why. I had that same feeling about Wiener that I mentioned about Tom Snyder, and I never got it in any of the news stories. I wanted to believe that this guy really, I understand he has some issues, and now, of course, some big issues, don't get me wrong. But as it was ramping up, I always thought, maybe, he's getting caught. This is one of those stories that the media likes, and they might just be showing this guy in the worst possible light. I was trying to give everybody in that story the benefit of the doubt, but man, when I saw that documentary, I had that feeling about Tom Snyder, which is, I can't believe this guy is so self-absorbed. So this is, again, what I walked away with. You might have a different thought, but...
Oh, no, absolutely.
And I felt so bad for her. And this is before, the documentary ends prior to the whole thing that went on.
How you don't notice that in the dating process, though?
He was incredibly smart.
And the way just to talk about Anthony Weiner just for a second, I interviewed somebody who was one of his girls at a time when it was back when the story first broke. And she said that she just felt like a 900 number girl that he was just calling to get his rocks off, and that was it.
This is one of his girls who he had been in touch with on the internet?
In touch with on the phone and FaceTime and all of those things that he was doing, but Twitter and on the internet and whatnot. And I think that there was just this sort of compartmentalized, I got to get my rocks off at night thing. I live by myself. My wife's up there. We're dating. I'm in Washington. I'm alone. It's the hotel room. My life in a hotel room, is what he was saying. And so that there was, until the documentary, when it just seemed that a lot of it was about his super, super ego. And that he was oblivious to it. You talked about how Tanaka came into the station almost oblivious to the fact that he was just going to get, whipped on air for things having nothing to do with his tough stance on crime because he was a whole person. I think that's what the kind of the blinders on that Weiner had. And I do think, and I wanted to watch this Weiner documentary, and I did feel sorry for him too in a way, because I feel like this was just a guy who, this was his porn, and then that was it. But he had to exercise it in a different way, obviously.
Yeah, those things can become compulsions that you get obsessive on.
It clearly was that.
It was definitely that.
And now that there's an outlet, you can do that. I mean, 25 years ago, if you had those impulses, where were you going to take them? They really would stay in your bedroom. But he's broadcasting them on the internet, which every living human in the world can access. And he's sending out pictures of his genitals.
They had
that's just...
And they have one of his girls, as you say, one of the people he was in touch with in the film.
She was the extreme one.
And she was exploiting it, too. I mean, she was evil. When you look at the movie, you feel like he's a victim of his own compulsions.
Was that Sydney Leather?
Oh, right, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
We interviewed her once.
And what were your impressions of her?
A version of him.
Right.
Opportunist.
Opportunist, complete narcissist. And these people aren't embarrassed by what they do, and they enjoy the attention they're getting. I don't know what kind of psychic hole people have where they're happy with something that would mortify and embarrass the rest of us. Anyone else would dig a hole and hide there for 20 years. And they embraced it, and they ran with it, and they gave interviews about it, and they repeated the acts over and over again. I don't know if you're born that way or you've suffered some horrible trauma. I don't know what makes you so desperate for attention that you don't care how sick and embarrassing the intention is. It
is a cry for attention, though, especially in this culture.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, when you find a topic that you latch on to the way you do, I mean, OJ kind of hit you in the head, and Trump has sort of hit you in the head because the numbers have spiked. But apart from that, when you'll pick up on one case of police abuse or one case of government abuse, who makes that decision? How do you come to that?
It hits us the same. It's just a matter of who finds it. We get emails from listeners because the audience is so vast. If you look at the entire audience, they read or watch everything. And now there are so many websites that aggregate stories, so all stories are copied over and over again. Nothing really slips through the cracks anymore. So, we would find a lot of stories like in the back of the newspaper. Maybe a local story, but if you opened it up, it would have resonance for everyone. The key, when the station's working really well, all the hosts are saying what people are thinking in their cars. They're looking at the world. You have to have a world view. And when the world doesn't make sense to you, to me, the world isn't making sense to a million other people listening. So all you have to do is articulate what you see with your own eyes and express it. And odds are everyone else is seeing the same thing too. And now with this weird media we have now, this hyper-politically correct media, there's a lot of things happening that they will not see. And I still do, and the audience still does. And so that's the center of the niche there, is looking at all that stuff that, to me, it's there. Look, see?
Does the knocking down political correctness kick the door open for real hate?
No.
It doesn't?
No, it's two separate categories.
It is. No, I know it is.
You know,
I'm saying
and then that's the... It's
one
that,
comes in masquerading as another, though, don't you think?
Well, who sets... See, the thing is, it's always a fight over who's going to set the terms. Ken and I have been vilified by some groups, and people are yelling hate when we're just discussing the issue. To some people, you can't discuss the issue. You've already committed a violation. Well, that's crap, and we're not putting up with that. You know, and by the way, I always reject the idea that everything you say has to be considered hate or racism. The tribes are never all going to get along. And everybody finds objectionable things about everybody else's culture. And some of them are legitimate. And that you can't say out loud and say, you know what, I don't like that particular practice in that culture. It bothers me. It's not racism. It's like, I'm feeling uncomfortable.
Does it need to be said, though?
Well, it should be said if that's how you feel. We don't have to be snowflakes. It's like, if somebody doesn't like something about my culture, I don't care. If somebody doesn't like something about my personality, I don't care.
That's different.
It's not
your
hate.
personality is different, though. But when it gets to your culture, I don't have
wondering
if...
See, I don't have a culture. I've never felt like I was part of like some group. I don't identify. I identify myself only as me.
Right.
I don't identify.
You just said the tribes can't all get along. So are you in a tribe? Or are you outside a tribe? What tribes are you talking about?
I guess the tribe I come from is the white lower middle class blue collar tribe, which had a certain set of social mores.
Sure.
And there are other things that I find distasteful, and I don't know why I can't say that. And see, once it's interpreted as hate, well, that shuts down the conversation. That means you don't have a point. You don't have a legitimate thought. You suddenly have to now go in the corner and beg for forgiveness. I'm not asking anybody else to do that. And it's shutting down people's expression, and it's shutting down descriptions of what is true and what is accurate. And it just makes us crazy. And that's that's 150 miles away from hate. Everything has been labeled hate. I remember a few years ago.
And there's no ride back for that either.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago I started hearing on sports radio a common cliche was used. It's like, oh, they're just haters. They're just haters of Kobe, or they're just haters of whoever. It's like, what is this? What do you mean haters? It means you can't criticize somebody, okay? Somebody looks like they dogged it in a game, they tanked the game. You can't say, oh, he dogged it, he tanked it. Oh, you're just a hater. And that became like the binary way of discussing anything in life. It's either you had to support something, and if any way you criticize it, well, you're a hater. I mean, there's
this fire the coach mentality that as soon as you make one bad call, oh, that guy's got to go.
Yeah, there is. Here's why I actually think hater works, although I agree with what you've just said. But here's how, in the broader context, I remember reading a news story on KF. I was reading the news story. It was about Trump. Yeah. And I just read the story, and that was it. And I got a tweet about, Thompson, you're a da-da-da-da, you can't, understand Trump's a this, Trump's a, I mean, I don't know. Listen, Cupcake, I just read the fucking story the way it is, okay? I mean, I didn't opine on it. I didn't change it.
But I apologized.
But I said, now I realize you're just a hater, meaning you've identified me as someone who's an enemy because I'm associated with, liberal causes, environment, et cetera. And so literally my utterance of Trump has got you
that's exactly what I'm talking about.
At your keyboard.
Oh, plenty of people on the Trump side or the conservative right-wing side do it now, too. It's become the national sport because I think it started on the left, but now the right has decided, okay, those are the new rules. We'll play along. See how you guys like it. Shove it back in their face. So now everybody's doing it.
It started on the left. How did it start on the left? I'm asking. I'm not arguing.
Trying to think when I started noticing this, because we were able to be controversial and say what was on our mind, and then it's gotten worse in the last 5 years or so, and I think social media has amplified it a lot, because you could used to say something on the air and it would disappear. And you could make a joke, and it would disappear, and your audience would get the joke. And then when everything became recorded and accessible 24 hours a day on podcasts or whatever on the internet, people from outside your little bubble listened to it, out of context, not getting the joke, not understanding our characters, not understanding the audience expectations, and started to demonize things, and then spread it on Twitter and try to organize protests. And because it's fun for them, there's people who do activism and protests as a profession, as a sport. It's their money, it's their living, and they need material. And to get material, you can go after programs or personalities who are provocative, and you could twist and turn. This is done to Trump and Hillary Clinton and everybody now. Everything is gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. The journalists are doing it too, but there's just idiots on Twitter, idiots on social media. Most of the people on social media are morons. They are. And they analyze things in moronic ways, and they spread all kinds of lies and distortions and out of context. But if they're organized and they got a paycheck depending on it, that's their bread and butter. That's what's necessary. And it's just made it really impossible to discuss things rationally at times, to have strong opinions on things. We still do it, but it's a constant fight, because people on all sides now intentionally misinterpret everybody. And it's become this stupid game. It's a maze.
That seems like actually a fair point. I mean, that things have become certainly it's become such a pitched battle.
Well, because of the literal and figurative comments section of life now, that I think talk radio, for all of what I love about it, has sort of pushed. There's less anonymity in talk radio. You don't have to say. You can say you're Jim in Pacoima and really be Lionel in Venice, but there's still this anonymity. But it's this. I think it has taught people or made people to think that they have to expect perfection all the time, and when they don't get that perfection, there's this sort of faux outrage that's shared by a lot of people. And it, I think, has obfuscated real outrage, and where people on either side should actually be upset, and picking issues like John and Ken do, and picking issues like the Young Turks do, all the way on the other end of things. I think that's an important part of it, but to expect perfection, I think, is really difficult. And I think the comments and the idiots out there that John was just talking about, I think, have taken this debate and this dialogue down so many notches now. I'm so curious as to what will help fix that problem, because I think that problem creates a lot of other problems.
It's now morphed into death threats. I'm sure Meryl Streep got tons of death threats after her speech. There's no such option anymore of, I didn't watch the Golden Globes because I figured there'd be a lot of PC scolding. So when I used to watch award shows, it was for the fun of it. It's a lot less fun, so I just don't watch. But there are people who will watch, get agitated because some old actress is mouthing off, and then next thing they're at the Twitter machines firing off death threats to her. It's like, that's insanity. That's stupid.
But it's also players dropping balls and getting death threats.
High school players.
High school players dropping a ball and getting a death threat. That's where we've got. What happened to a high school player dropping a ball and getting up and playing the next play? I mean, I know that's hokey, but the expectation of perfection, I think, is one of the most frustrating things about media now. And I think there's also
a sick, sadistic, psycho element in a lot of young guys where they do it just to do it. It's really easy. Three of us could type death threats to people all day long if we wanted. It's really easy to do. They don't actually mean it, but they do it because they think it's cool and fun, because they know it's really going to upset the person they're sending it to. And it's like a video game in a way. you're in a fantasy world where you send out the death threats and upset people, and you don't suffer any consequence for it. It's anonymous.
Yeah, exactly. As Michael says, you can do whatever you want.
The anonymity is just outrageous.
That's allowed so much. Yeah.
So that's why I don't even deal with the whole social media world. I'm just not on it. I don't partake.
You guys really ran up against. You had a couple of controversies. One was with the Latino community, and one was about something with Whitney Houston. Isn't that was that you said something about Whitney Houston?
It was a joke. And the other thing was we discussed illegal immigration, and activist groups don't want you to. And what they did is they took comments made by our listeners who left phone messages for an activist. And they got a friendly writer at the LA Times to print excerpts of the messages that the listeners had left on the answering machine. None of the stuff we ever said, but it was presented as if we had. That's the stuff I'm talking about.
Have you ever had to or felt compelled to apologize for something that you guys have said on the air? And
we have sometimes if it just it quells the commotion.
But have you ever felt in your gut sorry?
I don't feel sorry very often. I'd have to think because we're just expressing our opinions.
Right.
I've always, and we have certainly heard plenty of negative opinions too, and I've never asked anyone for an apology for having a disagreeable opinion. We get plenty of email every day. Well, you listen to that Moist Line thing we do. There's people who are always telling us to shut up.
Yeah, the Moist Line, they sit there, and it's pretty. One of my favorite things they do is the Moist Line.
Yeah,
people just yelling at you.
It's an audio version of social media, which is what everybody does all day. Is people just say stupid things. It's like we go after primarily bad guys. We go after politicians who've done something bad. We don't go after politicians because they have a different viewpoint than we do. We go after people who we think are actually damaging society. We go after criminals. So I'm not sorry about saying nasty things about bad guys. We don't go after good people and trash them.
But in 29 years, it's interesting. You can also, on the drive home, or maybe when you leave the station, you don't think about it and it's kind of done. But you can reflect on, yesterday it probably was a little hard on blankety blank. You've never had that moment though, where you felt like maybe I was
it's hard because we choose our targets specifically. It's like decided in advance that these guys are a-holes.
But it was even in advance. Has it ever been where something's revealed in the course of the conversation? You go, maybe I didn't realize that, or
yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, I couldn't.
In other words,
couldn't give you specifics.
Even not feeling sorry.
If the facts change,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, then we've said on the air, it's like, we found some new stuff, right? So it's based on what you know. Obviously, you can get out of line because of something you don't know, but there's no willful intention, to hurt people who haven't done anything. But nobody suffers consequences. Like, politicians are rarely voted out of office. Many of them ought to be in prison for what they do on a daily basis. So we make up for that. We provide some public punishment for people who should be out of work and should be denied their freedom to begin with.
And the reverse is true too for you guys, because as you alluded to, you championed the recall of Gray Davis and championed Arnold Schwarzenegger to become governor, and then once he was governor, you also said why he wasn't a very good governor. So
right. Because again, it was obvious. See, if you don't have an emotional investment, we don't emotionally invest in politicians or in parties. Parties and politicians become like churches and pastors for a lot of people. And you could see what happens if you emotionally invest in a church and the pastor might be diddling your young son. And parents didn't want to believe that that the priests they knew all their lives were raping their son. That's what happens with emotional investments. So we don't have that. I'm not capable of emotionally investing in anybody in politics or any party or any ideology. I just look and see, well, is this working or isn't it? Is this hurt people or help people? Are you stealing or are you not stealing?
Who was a better governor, Gray Davis or Arnold Schwarzenegger?
God, they were both bad.
That's a great question.
They were both really terrible. Because what Davis did is he planted the seeds to bankrupt the place with all those pensions. And he was incompetent. He was in over his head with the electricity crisis. But Schwarzenegger was probably worse in that he was a huge disappointment because he was campaigning on the right stuff. He had identified, or maybe somebody identified for him, the things that had to be done, the fights that needed to be fought. And as soon as he ran into resistance, he crumbled. Because in his heart, he's like Anthony Weiner. He had this voracious need for approval and attention. And he wasn't actually interested in any of the things he ran on. He saw that as an opportunity to get elected,
We could even have a president like that one day.
Yeah, that sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Sure, Trump could very easily be Schwarzenegger. But you know why? This is the thing. When you get sick of the Hillary Clintons and George Bush and Gray Davis, you get sick of all the plastic duds. Every few years, you want to go for something crazy. What the hell? What's it going to be worse? What's it going to hurt?
That's, by the way, exactly what happened.
Yeah.
And again, it was an election that the Electoral College and all that crap. But apart from that, the national psyche was just what you've described.
It's been a really tough 15 years. Since 9/11, if you stack up all the bad things that have happened, it's been rough. There's been a lot of wars, a lot of economic collapse, a lot of feeling that everybody's incompetent. And
willfully incompetent.
And not caring that they're incompetent.
Exactly.
And so people are going to put up with that for only so long.
Are you at all optimistic? I'll first ask you about California. Are you optimistic about California's future?
No. We did a piece that Joel Cocken had written for the Real Clear Politics yesterday.
Economics.
The economics
genius.
are absolutely unsustainable
because the taxes are being supported by a very small number.
Well, you've
of people.
got 70% of the income in California is from income taxes, and half the income tax is paid by the top 1%.
Right.
90% of it is paid by the top 10%. That's almost entirely tech stocks that's feeding all this. Well, obviously, that's going to pop one day. And so there's going to be tens of billions of dollars of deficit instantly as soon as there's some kind of tech stock pop.
Right. When tech stocks dip or bust.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about the nation?
If there's one thing that I hope Trump does is he sticks to his idea that when it comes to jobs, it's about giving Americans good jobs over everything else. The trade agreements, the immigration. You can't build a strong nation if people only have Amazon jobs or burger flipping jobs. The unemployment statistics are the biggest lie among all the lies you get out of the government. There's a lot of people who are out of the labor force and are not counted as unemployed. There's a lot of people working part-time or working at just cheap, low-skill, low-level jobs. You can't have families with these jobs. You can't have strong communities with these jobs. There is no reason to have so many of these jobs going overseas. There's no reason to have so many immigrants taking these jobs before Americans have them. You can use immigration to fill in the gaps. It's very useful, and that was the rational way to do it. So there's got to be an overhaul as to where companies put their jobs and then who gets to have them here. And it's got to be based on creating strength for Americans. That's our people.
Don't you have to educate that workforce? I always worry about Americans being undereducated, and now that educational system is just deteriorating like crazy. But doesn't the government have to take a stake in that?
Well, they've been running the education system. I mean,
those are some of the most corrupt systems nationwide.
Look at LA Unified. I mean, I don't live far from you. We pay a lot in property taxes. I have never been able to use a public school in Los Angeles. The amount of tuition I have paid, I got 3 boys, and they're all age 15 to 21 right now. The amount of money I have paid in tuition because I couldn't use the public school system, which I have paid for. I mean, that's infuriating.
Is that fixable? Because to me, that should be priority one, right?
I don't understand the breed of people in education. I don't know what these people do all day. I don't know how they're comfortable with themselves and the performance. Every year of my life, I've been out here since 92, every single year, by any measure imaginable, the LA Unified Public School System rates a disaster. Nothing changes. Many, many, many billions of dollars have funneled through the system, thousands of employees. Nothing is good. How can that be? And then everyone that I know who's made a few dollars went the private school route. Catholic schools, anything.
To avoid the public system.
To avoid the public school system.
Well, also, there are other reasons that people do that. People who can afford to do it because they're friends, and there's a social element to it, certainly, if you can afford to go to private school, wherever it is, even in places where there are good, quote-unquote, good public schools. In Denver, Colorado, great public schools. Outside D.C.,
right.
Same thing. Here, you have friends, I'm sure, who have kids in public schools who have thrived and done well, and it's just not optimal, but they can't afford the other. I think, as I'm a father of a son in private school, I went to private school, guilty as charged. But if I wouldn't be embarrassed to send my son to public school. I'm embarrassed that that's what the public schools are like here in Los Angeles.
Oh, I would have loved to send them to public school, but you just simply couldn't do it.
Are we too rah-rah? During the presidential election, that this Make America Great Again and the waving the flag and this sense of patriotism for patriotism's sake, we play the anthem at every moment we can. There's a whole big thing about flags and sort of like evaluating people.
It's all cheap stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Nobody does the
superficial.
hard work to make a strong country. They're happy to wave flags and listen to the anthem. God forbid, a singer screws up the anthem. They might as well just go die somewhere, right?
Right.
God forbid somebody doesn't wave a. It's all cheap garbage. Look what we do to the veterans when they come back. Exactly. The veterans literally die in the street right in front of our eyes. People are lazy. The human nature has a lot of flaws. I don't think much of the species. And one of the flaws is the emotional manipulation is really cheap and easy. You wave a shiny flag in front of them, wow, and you play the anthem. It's like, wow, that's cool. And it's like, we got guys dying in the streets. Can we do something for them? That's too much work. That depresses me. That makes me sad. I'm going to walk away now.
Yeah, the real business of running the country and making the country something.
How is it in the last 16 years for all the soldiers we sent to all kinds of stupid wars? 16 years, and the Veterans Administration still is what it is? Patriotic Republicans, compassionate Democrats, the end of it all, it's the same thing. Guys are dying in the streets. Why? How could you have a VA where, does every employee not give a crap? Every one of them? Is there anybody? That's just astonishing to me.
Well, I would say that I disagree with you about a lot of things, but I think I actually agree with you about a lot of things. But then there's...
you have to sit down and get to know me.
It's true. You're
listening to the radio show too much.
What you do is great. Sometimes I get pissed off about what you're saying or who you're dumping on, but boy, the way you package it and the way you do it and the way you communicate is just terrific, and it was really great to have you in here today.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Michael Shure, of course, we have ongoing affection for you, so thank you.
Thank you. It's always great to be here, even though the crowd today was just really unimpressed. Yeah.
John Kobylt, everybody, come on!
I got to applaud for myself. Yeah, all right.
Thanks, John.
All right, thank you.
Oh, okay. Let me just, It's just something. There we go. Yeah. I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. And if you haven't already, why don't you show your support and subscribe? What's the matter with you? Go to Edge Show. Oh, shit, it's Edge Dash. What's with the dash? Stupid. All right, I want to thank you for all the ways that you support my friends on the Edge podcast. To show your support and leave something on their website, edge-show.com. Stupid. Why is there a dash?
edge-show.com. If you like The Edge, help us out by liking us on Facebook. Subscribe to The Edge with Mark Thompson on iTunes or on Stitcher.